Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres. And we have been asked a couple of times, do we ever reuse our lids for canning? And the answer is yes, but not for regular canning. This week was one of our big town halls. What I mean by that is we live out in the sticks. You have to pardon that noise in the background. Henry and I are running the pressure canner this morning because there's a big sack of stew in there. Usually once a month we go to town. Now it's an hour and 20-minute drive to Sam's Club from here. And we stock up. Now we don't need everything every month. And some months we really don't need much of anything. Depends on what's going on and how long we're trying to stock up for. We particularly try to stay stocked up well in the wintertime because the road between us and Sam's Club up there can close in the winter if we have blizzards. Now, we're forecast to have a dry winter, and so far they've been pretty accurate with that, unfortunately. So the usual blizzard that we have sometime in December doesn't look like it's going to happen. We still don't like to make bets on things like that because the minute you bet on the weatherman, there's a really significant chance, especially this year, that you'll lose. So we get questions, and I know everybody who cans gets questions about this. Do we reuse our lids? Now, if you were to be able to read the fine print on this, it would say beef stew, November 17th, 2020. It's been washed, but it has been used before. Would I use it ever for making more beef stew? In a severe emergency, probably. And what I would do, if I had to use old canning lids. Now, remember, years ago we used to reuse our canning lids again and again and again. But the newer canning lids that they're making are thinner metal and just not as sturdy as the old ones. Big surprise, right? If you're using the new canning lids, they tell you not to reuse them. But we do. In a severe emergency, I would reuse them. I would check the condition of this ring all the way around. I would make sure that there was no rust or scarring or scraping on this white enameled section of the lid. And I would take my chances. If you fail on a canning process where, you know, you've canned your jar, it is safe to use after the canning process. You're just going to have to refrigerate it. You could wind up with a weaker seal. It's possible. I try not to reuse canning jar lids for what I call real canning. And what I mean by real canning is the sensitive canning, the meat, the stew, things like that. Most of the time, what I use them for is vacuum canning. So what I'm doing here right now is, Henry and I love pecans. We cook with them, and we also eat them as snacks. Plain old nuts are just a really good, healthy snack. When you want just a little bit of something in the afternoon, and you're on the run, you can just grab a few in your hand and run, and you're fine. So we'll buy the big packs. Now these are 2-pound packs. And we'll buy the big packs at Sam's. And then I put them into canning jars and I vacuum seal them. Now, I will reuse canning jar lids for exactly that purpose. Let's see if this one has been... Yeah, this one's already been sucked down, see? And this is the only instance in which I put the rings back on. Now, why do you say, do I put the rings back on? Well, the point of vacuum sealing these things is to remove as much oxygen as possible from the area around the nuts. Oxygen is what causes things like nuts to go rancid. So if you've taken the vast majority of the oxygen out of your jars, then these will stay fresher much, much longer. Now, I also keep them out of the sun, and I keep them as cool as I can, but the big thing is the oxygen, and that's a big trick for storing all kinds of things So all we have to do is stick them in here, and I've done the same thing with this canning jar lid as I would have done with any other one if I was going to use it, and this is going to get noisy. Usually, if the jar has not sealed correctly, when you pull this food saver lid thing off, the lid will come off. Have I ever lost a seal on it? Yes. And the reason I want to put the rings on them is because I'm not too concerned about a false seal with my vacuum sealed stuff. What I mean by that is when you are doing real canning, after you have done letting everything sit and relax and settle and everything else, and you've washed the outsides of the jars and you've labeled them, I always take off the rings because the jar can appear to be sealed. You'll think you've got a good seal on it, and it's only sort of sealed. Maybe it's actually stuck in place with food. And a week or 10 days or a month later, it'll let go. Now, with something like nuts, it's going to be fine. But with something like meat, it can be really bad. You can wind up with food poisoning. Now, most of the time you'll be able to smell it, you'll be able to taste it immediately, you'll know it's trash. But just on the chance that you don't, when we store our nuts and other things in the pantry, they're often stacked on top of one another like that. We just have so much space, so you do what you can, but we just take as good a care as we can of everything, and it takes good care of us. Now, one of the things I will say that makes a big difference for us in being able to reuse our canning jars, our canning jar lids actually, is how we take the jars off. Now, this is a perfect example of one that accidentally got slightly bent. I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not. See the spot right here? It's slightly bent right there. So what I will do when I have a situation like that, I can tell, whoops, okay, we're done canning. So I will turn the burner off. There we go. Anyway, right there you can see there's a dent in it. And by looking at this, I can tell that this was opened with a can opener. We no longer open our canning jars with can openers. And that has made a huge difference in terms of not ruining our canning lids. But when I do get one that's got a slight bend to it like this, all I do is I take that section and I roll it on the countertop. And that will smooth out that bend. And most of the time, that's going to work fine. Now, if when I'm sucking down these vacuum sealed cans, jars actually, it doesn't hold, I'll give it a couple of tries because there might have been some dust on the rim or something like that. I'll double check the rim to make sure there's no chips. I don't use chip jars for vacuum sealing either. And if it doesn't work, I throw it away. Now if this was rusty, if it had chunks out of the rubber stuff around the outside, if it had scratches on the inside here, it would go in the trash. I just don't use it. We're not in an apocalyptic survival situation, so you don't risk it. Let me show you what we do use to open our jars. Now, it used to be we would use a can opener. And when possible, I would always take the ring off, and I would always try to use the section that didn't have the point. But sometimes you just can't. It wouldn't work. Henry found this. We actually saw, I think it was Homesteading Traditions was talking about having found a cool canning jar can lid remover. He found this on eBay, I think he told me. It's called Pry-a-Lid, and I'll have Henry put the name in the show notes. But what it does is it allows you to get in tight and just lift the edge while supporting the edge of the lid itself, and you're not making any dents on here. You still once in a while will get a little bit of a ding on the edge, but that can usually be fixed, like I said, just by rolling it on the counter and looking to make sure it's even. So I thought that was a pretty cool hint, something useful for people. We work very hard never to reuse our canning jar lids on regular canned items, especially on what I call sensitive things like meats and stews and soups. But if all else fails, you can. You just have to be aware that there's a higher chance of failure. We were lucky enough that when we realized what was going on this year, I started scouting everywhere for canning jar lids, and I have a fairly decent stash of brand new wide mouth and narrow mouth canning jar lids. We were sort of taking stock a little bit this morning because I had to crawl in the pantry and get the quart jars out so that we could do stew. And I have to admit I'm pretty pleased with it. Now I'm a little shorter on quart jars than I'd like to be, but I can fix that because I have a bunch of quart jars that are currently being used for storing dried beans and things like that. So if I have to, I could shift them into half gallons and then wash the quarts and use them for stews and soups. But I think we'll be okay. And we will definitely be stockpiling. We have enough jelly and jam jars. We don't really make that much jelly and jam. We have a fairly decent stash of it right now, and how much jelly and jam can you eat? Don't answer that. A lot, I know. And that's part of the problem. We don't really need to eat a lot of jelly and jam. But pints and quarts can be quite the premium. Half gallons you never can in. Those are used just for storage, except for I think you're allowed to can juices in half gallons, but we don't can juice. So hopefully this gives you some thought processes on the things you can do. We store nuts, beans, rice, things like that in canning jars. Currently I only have we call it the sucker downer, very scientific. It's called a food saver jar sealer for the white mouth cans, jars. We're planning to get the smaller one, just haven't gotten around to it. I don't even know if they're available right now, as many things. But think about what you might be able to stash. Do you ever have a problem with stuff spoiling before you get to use it? So hopefully this inspires you to think of things that you can store. If you've ever had trouble with nuts or rice or things like that, developing sort of an off flavor, a bit rancid or just kind of stale, vacuum sealing can make all the difference. So be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and have a great holiday season. Whatever your holiday may be. And I have to get back to doing this, because I have lots more to do. In case anyone is wondering what 6 pounds of pecans looks like when it has been vacuum sealed, minus I think I only ate 3 or 4 pecans, this is it. We have 15 jars that are pints, and one that's a 4-ouncer, and this, that's just a snack. So somebody will mow through the kitchen today, and that'll disappear. But all the other ones here have simply got the month and the year on a little sticker on the top, and these will all go into the pantry, where we'll sit until we need them.